All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Strange, Dark, and Related podcast. I am your host, Elfie, and with me are the Relateds. And as always, we're going to start off with a question of the day. I came across this one on Reddit, and I thought it was a very, very clever question. I liked it. So if someone was breaking into your home and the only thing they stole was the stuff on top of your fridge, what would they be getting away with? And so, like I said, my name's Elfie, and I don't have much on top of my fridge. The only thing I have is my Vitamix blender, and I'd be really, really sad if they stole that because I love that thing.
That's the only thing you have on your fridge?
Yeah, that's the only thing. Maybe dust, but that's about it.
Let me just steal dust.
So for me, I have some empty water jugs and some full water jugs, and then all of my appliance manuals are also on top of my fridge.
Nice.
Oh,
and what's your name?
And a canister of pasta.
And what was your name?
Oh, yes, I'm Willow.
Hi, I'm Levi, and they would most likely just be stealing a bunch of recipes, frosting, and just a big box of popcorn. That's it.
I mean, I feel like, Levi, yours is probably one of the better ones. I like the recipe side of things.
Yeah, and a whole box of popcorn. Man, I'm not going to say no to that. Is it like the movie theater butter popcorn?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the best.
But it's like the box is open and they're just like 3/4 of the way gone.
Oh.
So actually tricks on them.
Yeah.
Nice. All right. Let's jump into today's episode, which is an interesting one. Prior to this episode, I hadn't done too much research, but I actually had a lot of fun looking into this one. And our topic for today is Bigfoot. So, I never believed in Bigfoot until I had heard the story of Al Berry and Ron Moorhead's recording that they did up in the Sierra Mountains. And basically, you can look it up on YouTube. It's out there. And basically they went out to this remote deer hunters camp up in the Sierras. And because they had heard that there were reports of strange things happening in this area. And Al Berry brought his state of the art, well, at the time, Sony portable recorder. This was back in 1972. So just keep in mind, right? It's not like today's state of the art stuff, but for that time it was state of the art. And the first time they went up there, nothing really happened. They saw some large footprints, but they're like, you know what? Anyone could have just created those. That's not really evidence of anything. But the second time they went up there, when it started getting dark, they heard something approaching the camp, and whatever it was hitting the wood and rocks as it was approaching. And then the recording, you can hear it. It's two voices are going back and forth, and it kind of sounds like a weird language that's being spoken, nothing that I've ever heard before. And it kind of sounds like these creatures are talking. And then you also hear some whistling back and forth. And also it almost sounds like they're saying whoop, whoop, or something like that. So it's a whooping sort of sound. And after that, I was like, oh my gosh, now I'm hooked on Bigfoot.
So I actually had never really done much research on Bigfoot. And looking in so the way that I did this research was I just listened to a bunch of sightings and then looked at the indigenous population and what they said and some of their lore. But what was interesting is in a lot of the sightings that I listened to, that wood knocking and the rock knocking is very common in all of them. It is something that is a common thread amongst all of them. And a lot of the ones that I listened to were from like the Wisconsin, Missouri, Illinois area.
Okay.
So another interesting thing that you found is that that was in the Sierras. And what I was like, the sightings that I was listening to were from like
a different area. Yeah.
Yeah, like the North Midwest, I guess. I don't know what that area of the US is called. I also didn't I just realized this. I didn't see if Canada has any of their own sightings.
Canada does have some sightings, but I think like in my research, I found that most of the sightings were in the Pacific Northwest. And then, of course, like Montana, Missouri, like that area as well. But most of the sightings were Pacific Northwest, like mostly in Washington, which was interesting.
So, speaking of Washington, there is a documentary out there called I forget. It's like Search for Bigfoot or the Sasquatch or something like that. And it actually talks about marijuana farms up there.
Oh, yeah. It's called Sasquatch. I hated that documentary because I watched it thinking it was going to be about Bigfoot and it wasn't. And I was so mad. And I was like, this was a complete waste of my time. And they completely misled me. This is stupid clickbait. I do not like you.
Yeah. So I was disappointed that it wasn't cryptology, I think it's called, or cryptology, right? Or zoology.
Yeah.
So I was disappointed in that, but I also am fascinated about like the drug world and all of that. So I was like, ooh, another interest of mine. So I found it very interesting.
Yeah, I think if you're going into it knowing that it's about like the drug world, it is very interesting and there's like a lot of information. But if you're going into it thinking it's Bigfoot, you'll be very disappointed.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but I also wonder if some of those Bigfoot stories might also be part of that drug story as well.
Yeah, it could
from
be.
Seattle.
Yeah, it definitely.
Well, and it's also from like essentially like Erie, like Humboldt area all the way up, right? Because, yeah. Levi, what are some of the things that you found interesting about Bigfoot?
Well, I went on Wikipedia, of course, but I also went on this website called history.com, and I found an FBI file investigation thing. They got hair samples and notes about it. But they did search it up, even if they didn't believe it, which really surprised me how much evidence they got, considering how there's been rare sightings of it, and that's just flashes of notices, not even like the best they can do is tracks, which can also be made by a human. So it really surprised me that the FBI was involved.
Yeah, and that they were doing like trying to see if it was real or not.
Yeah, that is actually really interesting, and I wonder like how many reports the FBI gets regarding Bigfoot, especially in relation to like missing persons.
So I'm going to approach this as if it is possible that they are real, right? Because I think it's more fun than be like, absolutely not, they're not real at all. I think it's more fun to think that this is a possibility. One of the things that was kind of cool is that there are petroglyphs from indigenous people showing a larger humanoid figure in relation to other ones. So like a giant. Some believe that this larger humanoid creature could be depictions of a Sasquatch or Bigfoot. And from some of the sightings that I was listening to on YouTube, it does sound like it is a group of them, and it's not just one. So it sounds like there's many of them. And it also sounds like they are generally peaceful if you approach them peacefully. Also, a lot of the sightings that I was listening to are no hunt groups. So they aren't actually out there with aggressive intentions.
Yeah.
Which I appreciate. So like talking back, like for example, when I went shark diving, I didn't want to chum the waters because I think it's important to see things in like animals in their natural environment without causing that aggression. If Sasquatch and Bigfoot is real, I think that is like, you don't want to approach things aggressively like that, right? So a lot of the interviews that I was listening to had to do with no hunt groups. So one of the things that I thought was interesting that one of the interviewers said was his son had an aggressive encounter with a Sasquatch. And he said that you actually have to look, like when you hear these aggressive encounters with Sasquatch, you have to look at it from like, what is the whole context of it? Like, were you approaching areas that maybe they didn't want you to approach? Because a lot of these areas also hunt a lot, right? Like deer or whatever it is, whatever the season is. So he said that his son was out hunting. And then when they went out in the daylight, it seemed like a very Sasquatch common area, like an area where Sasquatch would roam. And so his dad, the interviewer, said that he thought that his son was approaching an area that the Squatches didn't want them in. Yeah. Which is why it was an aggressive encounter instead of staying on their side of where they normally hunt. So interesting. So I thought that was also interesting that in general, his experience had been that they're very like, they might make noises to like scare you or warn you off and things like that. But typically they're not very aggressive towards you.
Yeah. So I would agree with that. I think that they're not a naturally aggressive species. There was a story I came across from 1955 in Montana. There was like two parents and they were there with their 8 kids camping. So a lot of kids. So what do you do when you have a lot of kids? You just put the older kids in charge of the younger kids. And so there were like different tents set up and some of the older kids were watching their youngest, one of the youngest kids. Her name was like Ida Mae. She was only 2 years old. And she was sitting in the tent with her older siblings. And she was kind of sitting near like the entrance of the tent. It was like open so that there could be like a breeze coming through. And the older siblings like ran to the parents. They're like, oh my gosh, the craziest thing just happened. A bear took Ida Mae. And they're like, what do you mean a bear took her? Like, what? And they're like, yeah, like this bear came up to the tent, reached into the tent and like scooped her up in their arm. And they're like, we have to call the authorities. Like, this is insane. And so they call PD. PD comes out and they're like, well, bears can't scoop children like that. Like, they can't. Like, are you sure you didn't see like a very hairy person do this? Are you sure it was a bear? They're like, it was a bear. Like, we're sure it was a bear. It looked like a bear. And they're like, oh, okay. So they had searchers out there looking for this child. For 2 days, they couldn't find her anywhere. And then finally, like after those 2 days happened, one of the searchers was like, I found her. And they found her about 300 yards away from the campsite. And she was inside of this like very crudely built like fort type thing. It kind of looked like a den inside.
Like a little hut?
Yeah. And like she was sitting in there completely unharmed, like not scared, like very happy. And they're like, well, this is like best case scenario, like to find her like this. And so they asked her, I mean, keep in mind, she was 2 years old, but they asked her, hey, like, what happened? How did you end up here? And she said, oh, Mr. Bear kept me here. Mr. Bear fed me berries. Mr. Bear cuddled me. And she just kept referring to it as Mr. Bear. So, like, what that was, who knows? But considering that, I don't know if this is true, but they say that bears can't scoop and like bend their arms like that to like carry a child. And so it's speculated that perhaps it was like a Sasquatch, and like why they grabbed her, who knows? But
what area of the country was this in?
this was in Montana.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So
yeah, I also kind of wonder is like just how humans, there's different temperaments, right? I wonder if it's similar with the Sasquatches.
it could be.
Right? Because it could be that there is different temperaments, and maybe one group of them normally encounter very aggressive humans, and another one with this like group in Missouri that they encounter more of like, hey, we're here, we just want to observe you, blah, blah, blah. One of the really interesting ones that I listened to was this guy was walking along his property. It was nighttime, walking along his property, and he had a flashlight and he was with his dog, and his dog started acting kind of funny, and he like moved the flashlight and he saw what he believes is a Sasquatch just laying in the like in a field right there, watching the house. And he said that the way that, and he believes it was a female Sasquatch, and he said that the way that she was watching, it didn't seem aggressive or anything like that. It all is very similar to how you would watch TV. So it was almost like she was laying there watching her nightly entertainment.
That's funny.
Yeah. And that she looked over at him, and he said that it was, I guess there's been a lot of reports where the eyes glow like red or yellow.
Oh, okay.
But he said that when he passed the light over her eyes, it wasn't like red or yellow. It was almost like a clear. And that she just like turned around and like walked away and like went back into the woods. But he said that it seemed like she wasn't afraid. She didn't move, like startled, just very slowly, like just walked away. And it just seemed like a very normal thing that she probably does. And that unless he had if he hadn't had his flashlight, he would have never like seen her laying there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's like little stories like that where it's like, could it be something? Some of the things that I found were that said that could explain it is it could be like escaped chimps or gorillas or things like that have escaped from private zoos, public zoos, things like that, and now just live in the wild. Some of the indigenous stories that I've read said that it could be an animal humanoid figure. It's just a different sort of species that live there. And yeah, so I think that could be another thing. It could just be bears, like you mentioned, Elfie, with like the scooping. Yeah, it is really fascinating because if with like the whooping and the wood knocking and all of that, and with the indigenous like petroglyphs, like what is it that was like that is out there?
Mm-hmm.
Did you say something, Levi?
Your story kind of makes me wonder now.
Mm-hmm.
What if everybody has had an encounter with a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch once, but just couldn't see it, whether it was because of the dark or they just didn't notice it?
Yeah, like being out in nature.
Yeah.
It could be. It sounds like they might be more nocturnal than daytime creatures. So maybe, right? Absolutely, maybe. There's been a few times when I was out in the mountains and you can't see very well. Like, I don't know, I don't have great night vision, right? I don't think humans are known for their awesome night vision. You're absolutely right, Levi. There could be things out in the dark that we just don't see.
Yeah, I think
that there is.
Yeah, especially since like you said, we can't see very well in the dark. And I'm not very familiar with the different sounds of animals. Mm-hmm. So if I heard like Bigfoot sounds, I'd just be like, oh, okay, it's just some creature out there. Like, I don't know what it is. I wouldn't think anything of it because I'm not that familiar with the sound of like, what different wild animals sound like, especially like nocturnal animals. Mm-hmm. So I would probably just like listen to be like, this is so nice, like relaxing.
Yeah. And what is the difference between like normal forest sounds versus not normal forest sounds?
Yeah.
I will admit I am a suburban girl. I grew up in the suburbs, right? Like, and my experience out in nature has been limited camping experiences. So yeah. It's like my nighttime experience, not like my daytime experience, but my nighttime experience is like limited camping.
Yeah, same here.
So,
yeah,
go ahead.
One thing that I noticed in the like Pacific Northwest region, a lot of those stories stated that the creature would whistle. So it was interesting that you said that you heard a lot about like knocking on like wood and rocks. The one thing that I noticed that was like very common in like almost every single story was they would say that they would hear whistling.
I heard that in 2 of the stories about the whistling. Very interesting about the whistling. So one of the guys said that he thinks it's how they signal to each other about how many people are there.
Oh.
So he heard wood knocking and then he heard 2 whistles and there was 2 of them there.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So he said that that's what he thinks. And then the guy that said that his son had an aggressive encounter, that guy also mentioned him and his son were fishing. And he said, hey, Dad, we're being watched. And I didn't catch, because I was doing something else when I was listening to them. I didn't catch if they were far away from each other, if they were using like walkie-talkies or what. But he said, hey, Dad, I think we're being watched. And like they were talking back and forth about it. And then the son heard 1 whistle. And then, because he said that they were being watched by 2 Bigfoots. And then one on one side and one on the other. And then one Bigfoot went and walked around and then joined the other one. And then they were like watching the sun. And then the son ended up freaking out and like leaving. So that's why, based on the conversation, it sounded very interesting. It sounded like they were not close to each other. So I'm wondering, because that one said that it was 1 whistle. So I'm wondering if one of like the one on the left whistled and said, hey, I see 1. Or it was like, hey, I'm coming. Yeah.
I think it could be a means of communication.
Agreed.
And I think probably the knocking on the wood is either them like making a little translation that other people don't know about, or they could be like trying to warn the humans about them being on their territory, like, get out of my territory, here I am. Or they're just making another form of communication. If some of the humans do like study it and learn how to speak to them, how to understand them. And if they do that, that would kind of take Bigfoot's natural resource of talking in stealth.
Yeah.
So 2 things, because you both said something interesting. Oh shoot, I forgot what Levi said that. I was like, she made a really good point. Now I can't remember what it was. Dang it. Okay, it'll come back to me. But there was something that Willow said how you mentioned that like one of them like whistled to the other and then there were two.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of the stories, I heard that there were two.
Really interesting.
Yeah. So there was one story that I read. It was from this guy, and his name is Jeff Boiler. And this happened in Oregon. He had previously been a Marine. He had been a police officer. And he was like, you know what? Like, I'm ready to like start like a new life. He was like fit. He was single. He loved hiking. He loved hunting. And he's like, I just love being in nature. I'm going to move to Oregon. So he moved to Oregon. And then the sheriff department there hired him on as a sheriff. So, he had just finished his shift and he was going to go home and just go to sleep. But he's like, you know what? It's a beautiful day out. And he just describes it as like one of the most beautiful days he had ever seen. So he's like, I'm going to go for a hike. Daytime. Okay. Yeah. He decided he was going to go for a hike. And so, he knew of like this like remote area where it was like an unmarked trail in the Cascade Mountains. And he went off, to like this, to do this hike, and he parks his car and he starts his hike. And as he's like going through this hike, the terrain gets really, really rough. And he's like, you know what? I've been at it for 2 hours. It's taken me a long time to get through this hike because how rough the terrain is. So he pulls out his map and he looks at it and he's like, you know what? I think I can go around and get to like a better area to like go through to get to the point wherever he was trying to get to. So he pulls out his compass. He's trying to kind of like map it out to make sure that he doesn't get lost. And as he's looking at his compass, like, I guess he's like holding it up, and I don't really know how that whole thing works, but I guess like he had to like hold it up and like look through it. And as he's doing this, he sees out of the corner of his eye, there's like some sort of creature like watching him about, I think he said like, it was like kind of far, but it was like up on like this ridge area. And it's like looking at it from behind like a boulder or like a tree. And so he brings his compass down. He like looks right at the creature and they're just kind of staring at each other. And then he cocks his head and the creature cocks its head back. And he's like, okay, I'm definitely being like watched. It's like, and it's mimicking me. Like, this is kind of odd. So, he doesn't know what this creature is. He's kind of afraid, like, what if it's like a bear or something and it comes after me? So he's trying to pull out his pistol and it's just not coming out of the holster. And he doesn't want to take his eyes off of it because if it comes charging at him, he wants to know, but he can't get his pistol out. So he looks down to see like why it's not coming out. He pulls it out. And when he looks up, it's gone. He's like, what the heck? Where did it go? He climbs up a tree trying to get like a better view of like the area. Can't find it. So he's like, you know what? I'm going to go over to the area where it was at. I don't know why that seemed like a good idea, but he did. He went there.
But also military and a cop. Very much like go towards danger, not away from danger.
Yeah, like let's figure out what this thing is.
Right.
So he goes to the area trying to find clues of like, what the heck could this thing have been? He's looking around. He doesn't really find any clues. And he's like, well, the only direction it could have gone is this way. Let's start going that way and see if I can find it. So he starts going that way. And like, I think he like walked for about an hour and then he stopped and was like, you know what? I don't recognize where I'm at. I'm lost. This is not good. And then he looks up at the sky. He's like, it's going to get dark soon. I don't have a flashlight. I don't have any supplies to stay overnight. Like, I'm putting myself in a really bad situation. I need to turn around.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. So he turns around and he starts walking back the way that he came, trying to find the trail, right? This unmarked trail. And he starts like walking back and he hears like something like snap and then crash down. And it sounds like a tree has fallen. And he's like, OMG. Like, I could have just been crushed by a falling tree. That is terrifying. Like, thank goodness I'm okay. This is a sign I definitely should turn back and like head back. And so he had heard that like on his left side. And so like he keeps like walking down, kind of trying to like find his way back. And then he hears another snap and fall. sounds like another tree has fallen on his right side. And he's like, okay, like the chances of hearing one tree fall is kind of rare. The chances of hearing two within like a few minutes of each other, he's like, that's really, really rare. Like, he's like, is it the creature? And he's like, but how could it have gotten from like one area to the other area so quickly without me seeing it? And so he's like, well, maybe there's two of them. And so he like starts like kind of picking up the pace, trying to get out of there. And then on his left side again, he hears another tree fall. And he's like, all right, I got to get out of here. Like this thing, it does not want me here. And so he starts like running. And he's like going down as quickly as possible down this mountain. And he gets to this clearing. And in this clearing, there's a deer. And the deer stops and it looks at him, not fazed at all by his presence there. The deer's like, whatever. And then it looks behind him and it freaks out and books it. And he's like, okay, there's definitely something behind me. And the deer wasn't scared by me, but it's scared of whatever's behind me. So he turns around and he's trying to see like what it was. And he can't see anything out there, but he knows there's something there. And so he just starts running, and the whole way down, he hears like these trees like crashing down like on either side of him. And he never got hit by a tree, but he just hears like these sounds. And he said it sounds like a falling tree, but really it could have been anything, you know? And he finally makes it to his car, and he books it all the way back to the sheriff's office and tells them, I know this is going to sound crazy, guys, but I need to tell you what happened to me. So he describes like what it was. And they said that they get a lot of reports like that for that area, where they hear like trees crashing. They'll see like multiple creatures out there. They'll see, they'll hear whistling in the area. And PD has been out there multiple times looking for these creatures, and they never find anything. But they get multiple reports of that same area all the time, and they don't know what it is. And I was like,
interesting.
Yeah. And so it was interesting how like he kept hearing it, like the trees crashing from like one side to the other. Almost it like, to me, he said that he felt like he was being hunted, but hearing the story, to me, it sounded like he was being herded away, and almost like they were trying to help him like get back to his car just to leave because they did not want him there.
Right. And I think based on all of the stories that I listened to, all the encounters, I feel the same way. I feel like a lot of these aggressive encounters, because I feel like he would probably think that that was an aggressive encounter, right? It feels like I don't know. I don't feel like they were trying to cause him harm. I think they were saying like, don't go here, like don't go over here, don't go there, don't go here, don't go there, right? And just similar to what a sheepdog does.
Yeah. And kind of how like they probably, it's like he obviously he was lost. He didn't know like where he was, so he's trying to like make his way back. And the fact that he made it back without getting lost, like that's amazing. And I was like, it really does sound like these creatures were kind of trying to like guide him back to his car. They didn't want him there. To me, I would say, I don't think they wanted to be friends with him. But I also don't think that they were trying to hurt him, because I think if they wanted to hurt him, they could have.
Yeah. So one of the interesting stories that I heard was there's this guy that they're like Bigfoot hunters. Mm-hmm. And he wears the same thing every time they go out. Same black polo, same hat, same walking stick, everything. And he'll like try to like call out to them and just be like, hey, I'm so-and-so, like whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then when he hears like the whistling and the sounds, like the Sasquatch sounds and all of that, he says that he talks to them. And he said that he gets responses back, not necessarily knowing what they mean or anything like that. And he said that other Bigfoot hunters have said that they are surprised, because I guess they've also gone out with him, and that other hunters are surprised that they respond. But he said that he wants them to know, like, I'm not here to cause you any harm. Like, I'm here just to like observe, just like you guys are observing us. So yeah, it is really interesting that you like mentioned like the crashing and all of that stuff, because based on some of his stories that I heard, he was the one that mentioned about he doesn't think that they're naturally aggressive, that you need to understand the whole context.
Yeah.
You know, because they might be trying to keep you out of areas and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Levi, sorry.
You make up a very good point. Like, I do think that they're hurting them, but when Alfie's story about them hurting him back to his car and only seeing one, I think that's because that there were multiple. He just didn't see him.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also I think it's interesting that the deer was like, oh, hey bro.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, that's like, okay, I'm out of here. Yeah. But I think like in the research that I did, it sounds like that they do eat deer and elk and they eat like berries and different types of like
foraging.
they're omnivores. Yeah, they're omnivores. They're not like vegetarian or anything.
Herbivores.
Yeah, thank you. I was like, what is it? The ones that just eat the plants? Yeah,
no, I remember it. I remember it as like herbivores. They eat herbs.
They eat herbs. Yeah.
But I also think that if they did have these occurrences, that so many people have seen them in multiples. Maybe they travel in groups. Maybe they are always in a group, and the ones who have seen them actually not travel in groups. Like, they're alone. That kind of shows that they strayed from the pack. And I honestly think that since these are peaceful creatures, me personally, I think that means there should be something hunting them to stay in a pack. Stay in a pack, bigger in numbers. That's really a sign for like hunting groups, like lions, or being hunted like deer.
That's an interesting point, because they don't appear to be scared of humans. Like, in everything that I've read, they don't seem to be scared of humans. But I think you're right. There has to be like some sort of predator out there, and maybe that is why they hunt in groups. And it seems like they kind of like spread out strategically in areas.
That kind of makes me think of something. So, you know, Uncanny Valley, where essentially it's like the reason why you get creeped out by human-like things is because they look human, but they're not human. It would be interesting if this was just another branch of our chain, right? Because there are those people that are very hairy, like they have like all the hair on their face, you know, and all that stuff. And and they're just like very hairy humans. I think there's a family of them, I think in Mexico, I want to say. I wonder if this is just another branch off.
It could be
our tree, right? Like,
you make up a good point. That I agree with you on that, since maybe they have lived in the wild for so long. Because as you can see from like our past versions of humans, Homo sapiens, and Homo sapiens sapiens, like they were like a bit hairy. They were in the wild. They were like that. So I'm thinking, since we evolved into building houses and all that, not really like restrained from being in the wild into being in concluded space with harmless creatures like squirrels. Not geese, birds. No, not geese. Geese aren't very harmful. But like squirrels and birds. But they were living in the wild.
Mm-hmm.
They would, since they are very peaceful, only hunting stuff like deer and are omnivores makes them seem like they are getting hunted, which is why we see so few occurrences. It's rare, but only in the wild, only a nocturnal thing. I think that they're nocturnal because the predators are out in the daytime, like how bats are nocturnal, since there are birds and raccoons and all that looking for them. And they're just bigger creatures, bigger peaceful creatures. The predator could think that, oh, bigger creature, bigger peaceful creature, more meat. And they could be hunted in the daytime. And I think that's why they help humans get back to their car, get back to where they need to be, so they don't get hunted too.
That's interesting.
That is an interesting thought, Levi. They could also just be social creatures.
They could be, yeah.
You know, and that's why they have a group. One of the sightings that I listened to, they said that it was a group of them out looking for Sasquatches, right? And it was during hunting season, and it was just a group of them camping out there. And so, what was it called? Like the game warden or something? Not a game warden, like basically like the ranger that makes sure that everyone's abiding by like the hunting rules and stuff like that, comes up to them and was like, "Hey guys, like, how's it going? What are you doing?" And them knowing like the stigma that is carried if you like believe in these sorts of things, right? They're just like, "Oh, we're just hanging out. We're from the city, like just trying to get away from COVID and be somewhere with no masks." And the guy's like, "Yeah, I get it. Like, cool." Because like they weren't drinking, they were just like hanging out at a campfire, right? Just like camping. The guy's like, "All right, well, you know, be safe, be good." And also he's like, "I don't believe in this, but I'm just letting you guys know. There's been a lot of like Bigfoot sightings in the area, so just be careful." And then the group was like, "Actually, that's why we're here."
They're like, excellent.
Yeah. But I thought that was funny when they were like that. The ranger essentially was like, "Hey, I don't believe in this, but there has been a lot of like Bigfoot sightings in the area, so just be careful."
Interesting.
Like, yes. All right, that's exactly what we're looking for. Thank
like,
you for
please,
that.
ranger,
We
please
will now
tell
go
us.
outside and search for these dangerous creatures, so-called dangerous creatures that you tell us.
Yeah. And honestly, from everything that I've heard and like read about from like the indigenous folklore and like the current sightings, I don't get the impression that they are dangerous. Like in the sense of, I don't think that they want to do us harm. You know, I think that if they need to protect themselves, they will. But I don't feel like they are like a naturally violent creature. You know what I mean? Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was one story that I heard about, and it may be because they were hunters, but it was like one of like the most aggressive stories that I heard. And basically, it happened in a place called Ape Canyon, which, let me see where that was. It's in Washington, in like near like Mount St. Helens.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like a group of hunters, and I don't know like what they were hunting exactly, but there was like a cabin out there in the woods where like this cabin didn't have any windows. It was just like, it was in a very like homey cabin. It was just a place where like you sleep for the night.
Like a hunting cabin.
Yeah, it's just a hunting cabin. It's nothing like spectacular. But they found like a large footprint outside of their cabin, and they thought it was like a bear print. But when they looked at it, it was actually like 19 inches long, which they're like, oh, that's like kind of too big for a bear. And one of the men said that he had seen a similar print earlier in the week. And when he would like bent down to look at it and like get a better look to try to figure out what kind of animal it was, he heard whistling coming from the forest next to him. But he couldn't see where it was coming from. And then he heard whistling coming from behind him, and he couldn't figure out like where it was coming from. And so he thought it was like a creature that was watching him in the forest. So he got freaked out and then like ran back to his group. But he didn't tell anyone because he was like, I don't want to sound crazy. Like,
right.
You know, it was probably just some animal. And another person in the group was like, I heard whistling too, but I just assumed it was one of you guys. And so they were like, this is kind of weird. They're like, you know what? Given this like very large like footprint that we found and these weird things that we're hearing about, let's not do a campfire outside because we don't know what kind of animal it is. It could be a predator watching us. I don't know. They're like, let's just stay in the cabin tonight. And they're like, yeah, that's a good idea. And so they were inside of the cabin, and they're like, you know what? We need to eat. So someone needs to go out there and get water from the stream. And all the guys were like looking at each other like, well, we don't want to go by ourselves. So two of the guys go out. Their names were Fred and Hank. They went to the stream to get some water. And as they were approaching the stream, it was like about 100 meters away. Hank suddenly just stops and raises his rifle to like this embankment. And Fred is like, what is going on? So he like looks in the direction that Hank is pointing his rifle. And he sees this very tall, hairy creature, and it's standing there on two legs, and he's just poking his head around the tree. And the only reason why they were able to see it is because the moonlight was illuminating that area. It was like kind of higher up, so they could see it. And they suddenly see the creature like duck behind the tree. And so Hank is freaked out. He's like, you know what? I'm going to fire some warning shots to try to scare it off. So he fires 3 warning shots. And that's when it like comes out from behind the tree. And instead of running away, it runs directly towards them. And they're like, this is terrifying. So they're like, forget this. We're out of here. So they just leave the water behind. They run back towards the cabin. They tell everyone what happened. And they couldn't see like where the creature had gone. So they were like freaking out. They're like, we don't know if it followed us back. Like, we don't know what happened. We need to barricade this door just to make sure it cannot get in. So they barricade the door, and like nothing happened. They didn't hear anything outside. And so everyone's like, you know what? Let's just call it a night. Everyone go to sleep. Everyone goes to sleep. And at some point during the night, everyone's woken up because something like rams into the side of the cabin. And it rammed it so hard that one of the wooden planks came loose and fell on top of Hank. So they pulled this plank off of Hank. And now they're able to kind of see outside. And so like Fred's like looking out through like this little slat, and he can see the creatures there. And he's not alone. There's 3 of them. And for the rest of the night, these creatures are just picking up boulders and just like throwing it at the cabin. And at one point, they even start like slamming into the door, trying to get in. And when they do that, like they're just like, well, it's barricaded. They're like pushing back on their barricade to make sure that it can't get in. And then they see like this hairy like hand reach into that like hole where that slat came out. And it's like feeling around and it gets a hold of an axe and it's trying to like pull the axe out. And so Hank shoots at it through the slat. And then that's when the three of them disappear. They don't hear anything for the rest of the night. And finally, when they see like the light, it's light out because there's no windows, but through the slat, they can see like, okay, the sun is up. These things are probably gone. They grabbed whatever they needed, their necessities, and then just got out of there and like did not go back because they were so freaked out. And so when people heard about what had happened, they went back looking for the creatures and they didn't find anything. But that was like the most aggressive that I'd ever heard. I guess like when they looked at the cabin outside, it was just completely like torn apart. Like clearly things had been hitting it like all night. Like there were boulders like everywhere all around the cabin. But that was like the most aggressive I've ever heard of.
So that's really crazy. One of the first story that I heard was about a guy that didn't believe in Sasquatch at all, but had heard stories. So out of his own curiosity, he's like, screw it. Let's go see what like all these people are talking about. Went out to an area that was like known high activity area and just like went camping by himself just to see. He expected to like go out there, have a nice night out under the stars. He didn't put his rain fly on, so it was like open. And he said that he heard like animal noises, like grunting and like things like that, right? Like animal noises. And so he like looked out and ended up seeing like a black figure. Oh. He was freaked out and like it wasn't moving, right? And because he also heard like I think like the wood knocking. And was freaked out, ended up, and so he like was pointing his gun at it and he shot a warning shot above its head. So didn't shoot at it, like shot above its head. And he said what he like based on what he knows now, if he would have never done that. Because he was expecting the forest to go quiet after he did that. And it was actually the complete opposite. It like erupted in sound and that freaked him out.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So he thinks that it wasn't alone and it was like a bunch like more out there and that it actually pissed them off. He was never attacked or anything like that. He actually went home and didn't tell anyone about it. And then told his wife, like, I need to tell you something. Like a few days later, like, I've been like dwelling on this and I need to tell you something. Told his wife and then she's like, well, we need to tell our friend Susan or whatever. Told their friend. And then that's how he got connected with like this Bigfoot hunting group. Like not hunting, like non-hunting group.
Yeah, like they're looking for.
Yeah, research group.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he said that now whenever he goes out, he gets like growled at all the time and like aggressive sounds get made to him. When that other guy who was like, hello, I'm here. Like, you know, he gets like whistles and that sort of stuff. So he said, had he known then what he knows now, he would have never shot at them.
Interesting. Yeah.
These stories make me think that they're only aggressive when the people are aggressive to them.
First, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're like, you attacked me. You attacked one of our family. We need to protect ourselves.
I agree. I 100% agree with you, Levi. That's kind of what I gathered as well from all of the stories that I listened to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder, like, because we heard, we also talked about like the child who was taken, and I'm wondering why,
why she was taken.
Why she was taken, because she was with her family, so it kind of makes me wonder, like, did it feel
aggressive?
I wouldn't say aggressive, but I'm like, did it feel like the child was in danger for some reason, and that's why it took it? Yeah, it was just, it was interesting.
Well,
or I wonder if they thought if Mr. Bear thought that she wasn't being watched.
It could be. Yeah.
Or maybe it was like, well, they never really seen such a young one over there. If they usually only see people hunting or them observing them, they won't really take their child over there.
Yeah, that's true. So maybe you've never seen a baby before. It's like, it's so cute.
Yeah. And so I was thinking, like, maybe I could do some observing, since this child doesn't really seem to be afraid of me. It's more just, here, I will take care of you, but I also need to observe you and see if the people who were hunters, the people who were doing that, if they were just born like this, or is there something going on? See if I can get any information from this little child, and make sure that it won't attack our group. Make sure that sends a message like, we are peaceful. Please do not attack us.
That's interesting that you mention about trying to gather information, because I don't have it in my notes here, but I did hear another story about a child that went missing. And this child, this was like, I want to say it was like back in the 50s or something, but they were camping and this kid just vanished. And they went searching for this kid, and eventually they find him, and they find him in like this bush area, and he was fine and he was unharmed, but he was like kind of far. And when they asked him what happened, he kind of gave like a weird story, so no one really believed him. The kid told his dad a story. The dad was like, okay, like, you're 3 years old, what do you know? Like, what you're saying doesn't even make sense. And then the grandmother, who hadn't been there, was told the story. He like told his grandmother the story, and she was totally freaked out. And so this child used to call his grandmother Cappy. And he was like, I don't like the other Cappy. And she's like, what do you mean? Who's the other Cappy? He's like, well, when I was at the camp, there was this thing that came, and it looked just like you, but a little bit different. And it was like not nice like you. So it was like the other Cappy. And so it's like, okay, what happened? It's like, oh, well, it took me to this, it took me away, and it took me into this cave, and there were like a lot of women's purses and things like that inside of this cave. And it started asking me questions, and I didn't know how to answer the questions. And so it got mad at me and told me to leave. And so I left, and that's when I was found. And so she's like, Cappy's freaked out. It was like, oh my gosh, I have to tell this, the dad, like, hey, this is what happened. Tells the dad, and dad's like, okay, that's weird that he keeps telling the same story over and over again. Like, what the heck could this be? So it's interesting that it was asking for questions, and then this creature was asking for questions. We will be right back. All right, everyone. Sorry about the interruption, but we are back. But yeah, so Levi, like you were saying, I think it's really interesting that in this story, the child stated that this creature thing was asking them questions what those questions were, I don't know, which would have been amazing to know. But yeah, it's kind of like, I wonder if they're trying to learn about humans through, I guess, less aggressive. Yeah, like a human that is known to be less aggressive, right? Like, if you approach like a baby, it's not going to attack you. But if you try taking an adult, they are definitely going to fight back.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting observation. Alrighty. So we are kind of coming up here on the hour, and I am curious for the final question. If you guys ever encountered a Bigfoot, what do you think your reaction would be?
I think it would depend on the circumstance.
Okay.
If I'm alone in the dark, 100% I'm scared. I'm scared. Right. I think if I actually saw them, one of the stories that I heard was like, this person actually saw them enough to be able to see like markings on their fur. They said like, not like a silverback gorilla, but similar to how silverback gorillas have like silver on their back, not the full back, but like how they have markings. So I think if it was like in the daytime versus nighttime, am I alone? Is it just a figure in the dark? Is it not? I think it would depend on the circumstances. But I think my emotions would range from excited to petrified.
Yeah.
It really depends, honestly. Like, did we do this before I did all the research, before we even had this conversation? Or was it after?
Let's say after you've done all the research.
It's a good question, actually.
Then I would tell it that I'm peaceful. Tell them that I will not harm you, but I don't feel safe. Can you please lead me back to somewhere where I do feel safe? And please do not harm me if you were going to.
Yeah.
That's
pretty good. That's a pretty good response.
That is a pretty good response. I want to change my answer to Levi's answer, please.
I'll try to be very calm, the calmest as possible, and try to get out of the situation before, in case that escalates or I do get kidnapped.
I mean, I feel like that is a good life tool.
Goal.
Yeah.
Don't get kidnapped. Yeah.
Like, stay as calm as possible, try to de-escalate the situation, and don't get kidnapped. I feel like, yeah.
Yeah, I think
The most
I would probably just stare at them for a minute and be like, am I really seeing what I'm seeing? Like, hang on a second. What did I eat today? Am I hydrated? I'd probably be going through a checklist like, am I actually seeing what I'm seeing? Okay, I am. And then I'd probably get kind of like freaked out. And but I would probably do what I do every time I see a wild animal, and I'd probably just wave at it.
Hello.
Hi. And just see what happens, man. If it waves back, I'm gonna be like, this is so exciting, and I'm so terrified right now.
Are you a Sasquatch?
I'm like, hi, I knew you guys existed. Please don't hurt me. Okay, bye. I'll just not go near the area where you're at. Thanks.
Yeah. Basically, just try to get out of the situation as safe as possible.
Yeah, exactly. You know what? It kind of does make me wonder if Sasquatches are real and do exist.
Yeah.
I wonder how many stories are actually of Sasquatches.
What do you mean?
So, like, for example, I read a lot of, like, what's the scariest thing that's ever happened to you out in nature or whatever, right? I wonder if some of these, like, people have seen out in the middle of nowhere, or structures that they're seeing out in the middle of nowhere, right? I wonder if some of these might be Sasquatches. Like, if Sasquatches really do exist, I wonder if it's actually...
That's what they're seeing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's possible.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I liked this. It was an interesting topic to research.
Yeah, it wasn't something that like I'd ever thought about researching before. But once I started researching it, I was like, ooh, this is actually really interesting.
Yeah, it is really interesting. And I know we didn't get much into the indigenous side of things. And I wish I could have dug more into the indigenous side of things, but fascinating, like very interesting, like even just seeing it from folklore, you know, point of view. It was a very interesting read.
I do have one last thing to point out, though.
Mm-hmm.
They are only in North America. That's basically what my research was telling me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there have been not really any descriptions anywhere else.
So, in my research, you're right. Most of the sightings were in North America, so like the United States and Canada.
Mm-hmm.
But I did find that there were a few reports in like other countries, but you're right, nowhere near the amount that there are in North America.
Yeah, and I agree. I agree that it is I think it's indigenous to North America. It's an, creature.
If you guys do want to learn more about this, there is the Bigfoot Discovery Museum in Northern California.
What? I did not know about this.
There's also a Bigfoot Festival.
I did not know this either.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's cool.
So yeah, you can go to those if you did like this and want to know more.
Thanks for that info, Levi.
Yeah, I did not know that. I did not come across that at all, like during my research. So thank you for sharing.
I randomly came across the Bigfoot Festival, but I didn't know about the museum.
Yeah, I didn't know about the museum either. I didn't know about the festival either. I didn't know about either.
Yeah, cool. I only know about it is because Michael Rugg, the owner of it, claims to have smelled Bigfoot.
Ew. And he got pretty close, huh?
Then the quote says, "Imagine a skunk that had rolled around in dead animals and had hung around the garbage pits." So maybe if I meet him, I would probably also give him like a car center.
or some shampoo. Here you go.
Here you go.
This might help.
That's funny.
Your fur looks very mangled.
Here's some detangler.
Here's some stuff. Please stop smelling like a skunk that rolled around in dead animals and hanged itself in a garbage can.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for joining us on another episode of the Strange, Dark, and Related podcast. We hope you enjoyed this one as well. Leave us some comments. Let us know. Do you believe in Bigfoot? Have you ever encountered, have you had any encounters with Bigfoot? If so, we would love to hear about it because this was a very fun topic for us to research. But yeah, until next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.